Thank you for joining us at World City. We're going to have a conversation today, which is called Between the Buildings. Today, I have with me Crystal Burns, who's SVP of Retail with Quadrille Property Group, and Sina Conebro with Henning Larsen, who's a Global Design Director there. My name is Will Craig. I am a principal with Kasian. And today's discussion is going to be focused around, like I said, between the buildings. And really the premises of this is to think about cities as they become denser. We're spending more and more time in places and spaces at the ground level and between the buildings. You know, what are our experiences in these spaces that lie between? And how do we start to think about and program for the design and curation of these spaces to create the more sort of connection, encourage more people to stay and to linger? How would you sum up, or you know, what are some observations you could bring, Sina, here to see how recent events have changed our perception of urban spaces and their role within cities?
Yeah, good question. Sure, the cities are very popular typology, and we see a desire for this type of lifestyle that cities can offer, and it's a global tendency, you can say. But we also see at the same time there's a densification going on, but there's also a more sort of where scale matters, where we have to work in a smaller scale. We have to work on with smaller pixels, high resolution, to think about the notching and the curation of the urban realm. So one size doesn't fit all, and I think in the old days when we did high rises in the cities, you know, it was all about the top of the high rise, but now everything is about how buildings land and how they create streetscapes, and the desire for people to have real openness to the ground floor and not just opening hours. That's also something we see, and for me, retail is a key component to sort of bridge that type of desirable lifestyle.
We've always known that our old model of building monolithic towers, I shouldn't say always, at least in the last 5 years, building office towers standalone with no amenity at the bottom, residential towers standalone where people live isolated in units, or these destination retail hubs that are cookie cutter of one another and provide no gathering or community space, are not how people want to live, work, and shop in the future, not how they want to live, work, and shop now. So I think recent events has really solidified the need to create for our projects. And once again, Quadrille, we're $67 billion in 25 global cities. We've got lots and lots of development we develop. That is our mandate. So we're in the ground building spaces right now, and we need to make sure that our eyes are not focused on what we used to do or what people used to want to do, but where we are now and where we're going, because that is how we'll build spaces that can provide returns to our shareholders. So recent events have been like really difficult, hard, challenging, but I think we're emerging in the retail environment, creating spaces that really will attract users, attract people. It doesn't matter if they buy in store, online later, that store is still valuable and provides the community with a place to socialize, gather, and fulfill those human needs that we have realized how much we really, really appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just to add to that. I mean, I think it's fascinating the fact that we're coming out of this stronger, or at least in certain ways, you know, that survival mentality. We've certainly been able to ride through a pretty horrendous period for not just for retail, but for many other sectors as well. And I think, you know, beyond just the rebound that we're seeing, I think that there's a deeper change that's occurring, and it probably was occurring pre-COVID as well, but we're certainly starting to see the impacts of it. You know, we do spend more and more time online just by virtue of these kinds of sessions and other things that people are doing, and certainly the convenience is there for, you know, in a retailing sense as well. But I think, you know, in terms of seeking out and finding reasons to connect with people People still crave that and still place a huge value premium on experiences. And so what does that look like? What does that mean beyond just sort of a bricks and mortar format? I think we're now kind of getting into some of those interesting discussions about these interstitial spaces and how projects meet the street. And we're starting to see some of these opportunities to stretch the boundaries between, some of the interfaces of public and private, and the role that the urban environment has to play as a whole. So great kind of fuel for more discussion here. And I'd like to maybe sort of talk a little bit about the densification of cities, because this has been going on obviously for some time. We're seeing more and more sort of, especially in Canada these days, we're talking a lot about housing shortages and affordability. We're probably going to see more of that occurring, and that's something that starts to focus a little bit around what does the space between and the space at ground level start to look like in these kind of contexts, beyond just sort of adding more amenity or sort of lifestyle pieces that people can kind of live, work, and play and be part of these environments and really kind of thrive in them. What are the sorts of maybe different models that we maybe see emerging, and maybe you have some examples that you can share of that, and we can talk about. I'm gonna put Sina on the spot here, and maybe talk from because obviously from your perspective, you're seeing a lot of different things in different projects around the world. So it'd be great to kind of hear your thoughts.
It's super interesting because there's a fight for the right to be in between buildings. It's about mobility. It's about adding nature. It's about how to handle cloudburst, rainwater. You want pedestrians. You want retail. So there's sort of a lot of people, a lot of activities are sort of claiming that space, and of course it is a question of that it's not only the auto city where everything is segregated, but it's also about how can we actually use the space between building, not for one thing, but actually shift program during day. And you can do that, of course, by design, by having more shared surface, slow down the speed, put in more micromobility, create more narrow and more angled streets, so you won't have these wind tunnels. So sort of curating the microclimate in order to make room for all living systems, not only humans. That's a good way to start. And of course you can, with geofencing, with different types of technology, communicating with the automotive industry, then you can also find a way how to deal with the new mobility, smart mobility in the future. I'm not talking about sort of the suburbs, the outskirts of a city, but more where you have the more complex lifestyle, where retail, living, working is sort of one unified theme. So for me, in a way, we need to look back. We need to learn from more medieval cities where the walking systems are shaping our plazas and pathways, and we need to think about technology on how to solve sort of the mobility systems and all the different modes we need to change from cars into other types of vehicles. So I would say it's a bright future in a way, but it's also about being a little humble, because we have only the resources we have. And I think instead of sort of just build new cities, we also need to think about how we can transform the existing cities and sort of merge these new ideas into the streetscapes.
And just as a follow-up, do you see kind of the importance of nature re-emerging and rewilding some of these environments as well? I mean, we're getting into sort of situations where we have less space to maybe do that sort of at a traditional scale. But are there other methods, means and methods that we could start to look at where where that starts to become viable?
But definitely, I think in Copenhagen we have a rule that all 15% of all facades needs to be green. So everyone is like, how are we doing that? Where should the water come from, and how can we harvest the rainwater instead of using fresh water? I mean, how do we do it? So there's a lot of things going on urban nature, but it's also about us as designers. There's a lack of knowledge somehow. So if you look at in our region, it's like if you have a lilac tree, there's only 3 species relating to that. It's a beautiful tree. It smells brilliant. But if you have an oak tree that has been around Denmark for many years, you have 600 species relating to that. So us as designers somehow need to work with this invisible knowledge on the performance of other stuff than bricks. And I think that is also changing the role of a designer, that it's not us just sitting in our tower, but actually us curating other types of knowledge in the right order. And I think that's super exciting, especially about this between the buildings.
That's awesome. I love it. Crystal, maybe we can think about some examples of what you're seeing, and just going back to that original question and theme.
I just love what Tanya just said, because it is all of those factors that bring together a place. And I come from an analytical financial developer background. So in the past, we're like, oh, that's pretty fluffy. Oh, we need to have biodiversity, and because it was something the city would impose. But I think that lack of knowledge is indeed changing for us. And we are understanding that there is a massive return on investment on places and spaces in between the rent-paying towers. Like, whether it's residential, retail, office, that in between becomes the heart and the reason why people want to be there, and the reason why they want to pay the rent or they want to buy the condo. And it's not just like designing that space. We're taking on a massive role in programming that space. Whereas before, when we would have developed something, we would have said, okay, here are the keys. See you in 5 years, pay us the rent. Now we're like, okay, we're going to partner with you to create these spaces and activate the spaces. So they can't be these wind tunnels, as you refer to, or uncomfortable or inaccessible. So an example that we're working on right now, Quadrille and our partner West Bank here in Vancouver, we're building a project called Oakridge Park, which is a 5 million square foot mini city, just 15 minutes outside of our core by train. It's on the Rapid Sky train line, and then another 15 minutes to our airport. So it's mid-airport and downtown. The city of Vancouver has designated it its second town center. So we have the blessings of density. We can do 60-story towers there. So we have mini master planned a city that brings in all these different elements, and its focus is a 9-acre park. This is part of our agreement with the city. We needed to provide this public park on a relatively small site. So we have made it the core accessible area. It has wooded areas, community gardens, play areas, a running track. So it's not just a field of grass. We're bringing back the number of trees that used to be on that site prior to 1940. So retreeing the entire place around the buildings, and then putting all the parking subterranean. And just to mention this particular site, it has an aquifer at P3 level. So we couldn't go below P3, but we're accessing that aquifer. We're doing district energy and building 13 towers. So we'll have 3,300 residential units, 800,000 square feet of retail, 700,000 square feet of office. We've got a community center of 100,000 square feet with a library and the senior center. And all of these things have to work together. They don't just sit next to each other. They intersect each other. So the parking and the vestibules and the access and the bike silos and the walking paths, it's an incredible project. We've invested $6.2 billion in it. We're under construction. It's Oakridge Park, and we're hoping that it opens at the end of 2024. So I would love you all to come and see it and witness it. But it is an example of our conviction and our commitment to what we're talking about today, is about really investing in the spaces that improve people's lives, because that's how we'll create shareholder return for our pension funds. It's altruistic, and it's not, because it truly is sustainable for us. So we're very excited about the project, and we've had fantastic interest from retailers and from people that would like to live there, condo buys, rental, the whole. So far so good, and that's during a very difficult environment over the last 2 or 3 years. So we're excited about it, and hopefully the proof will be in the pudding. that this indeed is worth the time and investment, and the complexity that you refer to of executing on these mixed integrated uses in relatively small areas.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. We'll definitely be there for the opening and looking forward to it. I think I heard a few things that were really sort of quite critical to this discussion, and I really agree with the notion that the complexity of ground level is changing. We need more of a nuanced design approach and understanding of how all of these things integrate together, and just creating a holistic sense of that is really going to be quite powerful. One of the things that we do as a company and as a sort of studio is really looking at kind of ground level conditions from that street level perspective. So I often think about that in terms of the types of spaces that we're starting to create, and we're looking at sort of street to street level sort of environments and repurposement of existing spaces, and I think that's coming into the conversation as well. Beyond sort of new environments that we can create, how can we? You touched on this as well, Sina. How can we sort of repurpose our existing environment to make it greener, to make it more experience-based, to make it more viable, and actually the idea of nurture and nurturing community in these spaces. I know we talk about the community word a lot. It shows up in all of our planning presentations, but it really is such an important part of how we think about the ground plane as this kind of meeting place, as a place to kind of grow, for people to sort of grow into and become part of those nested communities, and be part of all the sort of activities and programming you're talking about, Crystal. So I think it's not necessarily adding more space and creating more in between space, but it's actually improving and diversifying quality, right? And sort of thinking about what it is that people come there for. The workplace has shifted. People are no longer coming to work just because they have to be sitting in a cubicle all day. I think the nature of that will continue to evolve, and we'll continue to question it, but it's going to be very much revolving around what people do and how they experience space, and why they choose to come there, and what are the other things that they can do while they're there. Much like in a retailing sense, you come somewhere to shop, but you also go there to eat or to meet people or to maybe to work, or maybe you live there or meet friends, right? So it's there's a whole range of different reasons why we would come to these destinations, and I think that now it's probably a little bit more part and parcel of all the work, design work that we're doing, and how we sort of think about cities as a whole. Extraordinary. I'm loving this. I'm going to run out of questions, but I think we can just start throwing some other curveballs at you guys. You're doing a pretty good job so far. I think one of the things I was thinking about was, that there's clearly some barriers. We have some great visions of the future, and everybody's kind of dreaming up, what the next iteration of these spaces will start to look like. But how do you see, the development, if we were to start to think about these new models and shifting towards a sort of more integrated development of spaces in the future, more sort of nature and nurture of these spaces? What are some strategies, or I guess some barriers that we currently see with existing models of development or design, and maybe some strategies that you see to overcome it? And I'll probably limit you guys to just a few minutes because we're going to run out of time otherwise, but I do want to hear what your thoughts are. Crystal, maybe we'll start with you this time.
Well, barriers are, for us, I think it's going to be that the in-between spaces and the investment, that those spaces are rich and deep and varied, require a lot of collaboration, stakeholder engagement, and they're expensive to build and do not have an immediate rental rate structure associated with them. So, the return on investment has to be proven out, and that's a barrier for us as commercial developers to take that leap that this space will indeed be worth the investment on the income producing assets that are around it. And I think for us, what helps mitigate that risk is that we take a long-term approach. We don't build for a year and expect to have it fully returned to us. We hold for the long term, 10 plus years, and that really proves out that investment in that space. So I think if we take that approach, it's helpful. And I also think one of the barriers for that is that, I've been talking about a standalone project that is, we scraped the site, it's from new, but we do have assets, obviously, in existing urban framework where you've got different neighbors that own other areas, whether it's across the lane, across the street, or even different parts of the building. And so how do you come to a consensus on sharing of that space and investing in that space? And for us, an example that might be the Post building. We call it the Post. It's also in Vancouver. It's the base of it is an old post office from 1958 that has been designated heritage. So we've kept that 4 levels. That's the old, beautiful sort of facade of this 1950s building, and then built 2 towers that pierce through the center of it. And those towers are going to be occupied by Amazon, over 1 million square feet. And the reason that they've chosen it is because at the ground level, we have maintained this heritage building and turned it into a gathering space with retail, food, gym, exercise, wellness. And, they've actually said to us, this is the reason we chose it to be our Vancouver headquarters, because we want people to come down from the tower. We want them to come down to the office, because it's this vibrancy and this interaction is what they're coming for. Because they could just stay at home. They could just as productive online doing web services than they would be in this tower, but they want the collaboration and the culture. And so I've gone off on a tangent. Well, I apologize. But so barriers are, competing agendas for certain areas and the return on the investment, but there are many, many solutions. So we're focused on those.
If I can add here, I think one of the constraints we have is that we see that it's easier to do new build. I mean, new construction.
Absolutely.
Some people might argue that, but we'll save that for another discussion.
But it's a problem that the people care about places, even though it's an old harborfront industrial site, brownfield, whatever. It has a history, and just by using or reorganizing all the embodied carbon at that place and the history, using that as a value proposition, it's so obvious. So for me, it's easier for a lot of developers and investors actually to do the new build, because it's not so it's easier to get through with your stuff. You don't have to do so much analysis and all that. So in a way, I wish it was a little different in the building codes and regulations, or taxes even, that you would promote transformation of existing cities somehow. So that's from my perspective.
So that's a great point. I think it sort of layers into this, the financial equation and the value proposition around, we know that these are good things to do for our own health and well-being and the future sustainment of our cities. But how do we actually incentivize those types of approaches, right? And I think over time, the culture around this will build, and so it will start to make a lot more sense. But it's great to hear, Crystal, that groups like Quadreal and others are taking that long-term view and thinking about, what does the vibrancy of our cities look like, and also how do these places become catalysts? We've looked at them. We've been doing some projects recently where we're looking at these kind of ground plane activations, and then they're actually catalyzing the neighborhood and creating change in those districts. And so it's sort of taking not the sort of maybe the immediate idea that you can take a building in a great location and and fill it full of tenants. How do you take a building or a campus that is maybe needs a little bit of help and of its own, but can actually start to create and re-energize the neighborhood that it exists within. I think that's a noble cause, but it's also a hard challenge. But I think it has a huge huge sort of value proposition behind it as well, if we can start to sort of think about that and how that starts to change cities for the better. I think this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate talking to you guys. This isn't the first time we've chatted, but I always enjoy having these kinds of debates. I know 30 minutes is never really long enough, but we will have probably some follow-up questions. Hopefully there'll be the opportunity to talk more about this in future sessions. So I want to thank you both for joining me today. Thank you to World City for being our hosts. And thank you to all that are able to listen and tune in. So look forward to meeting you again in future, guys. And thanks for everyone who tuned in. And we'll hopefully see you out in the real world.
Yeah.
Nashville, this thing's amazing.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.